Montana Territory, October 1883. The snow came early that year, dusting the Bitterroot Mountains in white as Willa Prescott stumbled down the wagon trail, arms wrapped around her swollen belly, boots soaked through. Her breath came in short bursts, fogging the morning air. She had nothing left, no wagon, no ring, no husband. Just the two babies inside her. Behind her, the ruts of the wagon disappeared into the trees. Ahead, the land stretched wide and cold. She had walked all night. A rifle cocked somewhere to her left. She stopped. A man stepped from the trees, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark blonde hair tucked beneath his hat. His coat was worn, his boots scuffed, and his eyes clear and sharp and steady held hers. "You lost?" he asked. His voice was low, even like he had seen worse than this. Willa's lips trembled. I need help." He looked her over, then lowered the rifle. "Name's Lawson Tucker. Got a cabin not far. You look like you need somewhere warm." She nodded, tears threatening, but she swallowed them down. She had already cried enough for one lifetime. Lawson held out a hand. "Come on then." She hesitated only a second before taking it. Lawson's cabin sat nestled against a grove of pine, smoke curling from the chimney. He led her inside, set a kettle on the stove, then pulled a quilt from the cot and draped it over her shoulders. "You alone out there?" he asked as she sat. She nodded slowly. "My husband found out I was carrying twins. Said I tricked him. Said he never wanted children." Lawson's jaw tensed. He poured her tea and handed it over. "So he left you?" "No," she whispered. "He threw me out." For a minute, the only sound was the stove crackling. "I'll ride to town tomorrow," Lawson said. "Get the doc. You're close." She pressed a hand to her belly. "They're coming early." He crouched beside her. "Then we do this here. You and me." Her eyes filled again, but this time the tears came from something softer. Hope. The twins came that night. Lawson never left her side. He boiled water, lit lamps, held her hand when the pain grew sharp, and kept his voice steady even when hers broke. After hours of labor, two small cries filled the cabin. Willa clutched her newborns to her chest, heart thundering. A boy and a girl. Lawson wrapped them in flannel. "You did good," he whispered. Willa looked up at him, her face pale, her eyes shining through exhaustion. "I do not even know your middle name." He smiled a little. "Levi." She laughed, breathless. "Lawson Levi Tucker. Sounds strong." He met her gaze. "You need rest, Willa." She nodded, but before she closed her eyes, she whispered, "Thank you for not turning me away." He stood, gently adjusting the quilt around her. No one should be alone through this. The next days passed in quiet rhythm. Snow fell steady outside, and inside the cabin, Willa learned the names of the man who had saved her. Lawson was 32, a former cattleman turned trapper. Lost his brother to fever, his mother to fire. Carried his grief like a worn coat, always there, but not something he spoke of. He built her a cradle from pine. He cooked meals. He held the babies when she needed sleep, whispering to them like he had known them all his life. Willa watched him from the rocker, her heart full in ways she could not explain. "I named the girl Jolie," she said one evening as he carved by the fire. "And the boy James." Lawson looked up, nodding with approval. "Jolie and James. Good names." She smiled. "They deserve someone who wants them." He set down the knife. "I do." She blinked. "What?" "I want them. I want you." Her breath caught. "You barely know me." "I know enough. You walked through a mountain winter carrying two children and still had room in your heart to love them. That tells me everything I need." She stared at him, chest tight. "And if you'll have me," he added, "I will be their father. I will be your home." Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. "You really mean that?" He stepped closer, cupped her cheek with rough fingers. "Every word." She reached up, placed her hand over his. "Then yes," she whispered. "I want that. I want you." Lawson leaned down and kissed her soft. "Sure." And in that kiss was warmth, safety, and something stronger than anything she had known. Love. Real, true love. And for the first time in a long time, Willa Prescott did not feel alone. She felt found. The first thaw came slow, creeping into the seams of winter like warm breath on glass. The snow softened and the pines dropped heavy clumps with each breeze. Inside the cabin, the air held the scent of boiled sage and pine pitch from the cradle Lawson had sealed against damp. Willa stood at the table with Jolie tucked against her chest in a sling. James lay swaddled in the cradle, his tiny fists rising now and then like he was boxing the air. She dipped strips of fabric into a basin, wrung them out, and laid them on the table's edge to dry. "You always move like you're making something last," Lawson said, leaning against the doorframe, his hat in his hands. "I've had to." She rubbed Jolie's back gently. "There wasn't much waste allowed in my father's house. He made us use every scrap of thread twice." Lawson set his hat on the peg and stepped closer. "What was he like?" Willa didn't answer right away. Her hands kept folding, her eyes on the cloth. "Hard. Not cruel, just carved from iron." He worked freight lines down from Helena to Bannack. Drank his coffee black and never asked questions he didn't want answered. Lawson nodded. "Sounds like he taught you how to stand up in a wind." "He did. But he never stayed long enough to see it." Lawson didn't try to fill the silence that followed. He just picked up a stick of firewood, split it, and added it to the stove. "I wasn't always alone," she said. "Before all this, I had a sister, Ruth, younger than me. She died of diphtheria the summer we turned 16 and 14. Mama never came back from that, not really." Lawson looked up. "You remind me of someone. Your brother." He shook his head. "My mother. She used to mend clothes at night by lamplight just like that." Said her hands needed to stay busy or her thoughts wandered too far. Willa smiled faintly. "That's the truth of it." Outside, the wind picked up again. It pushed against the shutters, low and steady. "I've been thinking," Lawson said, dragging a chair closer to the table. "Spring's not far. I've got a claim down by the creek. Soil's good. With planting, woodcutting, and trapping, it's enough to keep a family." Willa's eyes met his. "I'd like to build something that stands," he went on. "Not just survive the season. Something lasting." Jolie stirred, letting out a soft whimper. Willa hushed her gently, then said, "I never thought I'd have that." "You could. Here." She let out a breath. "I don't know what it is to feel safe somewhere. Then let's teach it to each other." Willa reached across the table and let her fingers rest over his. They were rough, scarred, calloused, but steady. She didn't look away. "I won't leave," Lawson said. "Not when it's hard. Not when it's quiet. Not ever." Willa nodded slowly. "Then I'll stay." That night, she nursed James while Lawson read aloud from an old volume of Whitman he'd kept wrapped in oilcloth. His voice was low, almost reverent, like he wasn't reading so much as remembering. When the babies were asleep, Willa folded their blankets and sat beside him on the cot. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the floorboards. "You ever been in love before?" she asked. Lawson didn't answer right away. "Once. Back when I was too young to know what I didn't understand." "What happened?" "Her family moved east. She wrote for a while. Then she stopped writing." Willa leaned her head against his shoulder. "I thought I knew love too. But it was just someone needing something from me until I had nothing left." Lawson turned toward her, laying his hand over hers. "This is different." She nodded, her voice barely audible. "Yes, it is." They sat that way until the fire burned down to embers, the babies sleeping in the cradle, and the wind outside quieted to nothing. In the stillness, Willa felt it settle something deep and solid. Not just safety, not just warmth, but belonging. And for the first time in her life, she believed it might last. By early April, the creek behind the cabin ran full and fast, fed by meltwater threading down from the ridges. The ground had softened enough for planting, and Lawson had cleared a patch near the tree line, turning the earth with a spade worn smooth from years of use. Willa stood nearby with Jolie balanced on one hip, watching as Lawson worked a row with slow precision. James lay in a basket beside her, shaded by a cover stitched from spare cotton panels. The sky hung pale blue above, touched with thin clouds that drifted like smoke trails. "You ever plant anything before?" Lawson asked, not pausing in his rhythm. "Corn once. Back in Kansas," Willa said. The field flooded before it even tasseled. My mother cried for 2 days. He straightened, wiped his brow with a bandana, and looked at her. This land's higher. Won't flood easy. Willa nodded, but her fingers tightened on Jolie's leg. It's not just the flood I remember. It's the waiting, the hoping, watching something you planted struggle to rise. Lawson stepped to the edge of the row and took the girl gently from her arms. Jolie nestled against his shoulder without protest. Things survive here, he said, even when you figure they shouldn't. Willa watched him, how his hand cradled the baby's back, how his eyes flicked to the trees as though measuring where shade would fall come summer. Have you always lived like this? She asked. He adjusted Jolie's sling. Not always. Used to ranch cattle out near Miles City. After my brother died, I sold what was left and headed west. Didn't want to be around the noise. What changed? Lawson's gaze met hers. You. She looked down, brushing soil from her skirt. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything, he said. Just be here. Later that afternoon, Willa took a basket down to the creek where the current had torn loose a tangle of roots, leaving a pool edged with stone. She dipped the linens in slowly, careful not to stir the silt. The babies slept nearby under a patch of birch, watched over by a gray and white shepherd dog that had wandered onto the homestead a few days before and never left. She hummed without thinking, her voice low and steady, something old and wordless. I've only heard one other woman hum like that, Lawson said behind her. She turned, startled. He stood with a sack of seeds slung over one shoulder, his boots muddy to the ankles. My grandmother, he added. She sang to keep time when she shelled beans. Willa smiled faintly. It helps me think. He stepped beside her and knelt at the edge of the water. You've taken to this place fast. I don't know that I had a choice, she said, but I know what it feels like when something fits. He studied her a moment. What would you want here if you could have anything? She rinsed a cloth and laid it flat on a rock. A smokehouse, proper fence, chickens, maybe, and a bell to hang on the porch so the babies'll know when you're back from checking traps. Lawson's brow lifted. That all? Willa smiled, a tired kind of smile but real. A cradle that rocks without needing a foot on it wouldn't hurt either. He chuckled, then reached for her hand. Come spring's end, we'll have all of that. She didn't pull away. And after spring? We make this a home, he said. Not just shelter. Something built from more than timber. Willa watched her children sleeping in the shade, then looked back at the man beside her, hands rough from work, eyes steady with promise. I want that too, she said quietly. Lawson leaned forward, his forehead brushing hers. Then let's build it. By late May, the snowline had retreated to the highest ridges and the land below came alive with green. Shoots of wheatgrass pushed through the tilled soil and the birch trees near the creek wore new leaves like silk. The wind smelled of wet earth and wild plum. Willa stood near the fence post where Lawson was stringing wire between the cedar rails. Jolie was strapped to her front in a sling, her head resting beneath Willa's collarbone, while James sat in a wicker basket beside her, rocking gently each time Willa's boot nudged it. Lawson pulled the wire taut and twisted it firm against the post. You ever think you'd be raising children in the shadow of the bitterroots? I didn't think I'd be raising them at all, she said. Not after everything that happened. But now I can't picture them anyplace else. He wiped his hands on the thigh of his trousers and leaned on the post. I'll build a pen next. Harlan Downriver said he's willing to part with 2 hens and a rooster come next trade. Willa nodded. We'll need a coop that doesn't take in rain. The roof on the tool shed leaks. I'll mend it this week. Lawson glanced toward the tree line. You still want to go into town come Sunday? I do. She adjusted the sling as Jolie stirred. I'll need fabric for summer clothes. They're growing fast. His voice dropped low. And the preacher. Willa met his eyes. Yes, for the papers. I don't want them growing up as anyone's shame. Lawson didn't speak for a moment, then said, They never were. I know, but I want it written. I want it known. He stepped forward and touched her wrist, his fingers warm. Then we'll go together, and we'll come back husband and wife. The wind shifted, lifting the edge of her shawl. Willa looked down at James, his lashes thick against his cheek. I was afraid marriage would always feel like surrender. Lawson's gaze didn't waver. Not this time. That evening, they ate by lamplight. Willa had roasted wild turnips with salt pork Lawson had traded for last week. The babies were already asleep, their small bodies curled together in the cradle Lawson had lined with juniper shavings to keep insects out. Willa leaned back in the chair, her hands resting on her lap. I never told you what my mother used to say when something hard ended. Lawson pulled a sliver from his thumb and looked up. What's that? She'd say, now the work begins. Like surviving wasn't the end of it. It was just the clearing. That sounds right. He pushed his plate aside. This what we're building, it's work. But it's the kind I'd wake up for. She folded a cloth and set it on the table. You're not afraid? I've lived through enough to know where to put my fear. And this, he gestured around the cabin, toward the cradle, then back to her, this doesn't belong in that place. Silence settled between them, not heavy, but full. She stood, walked to his side, and placed her hand on his shoulder. I don't want to sleep in the cot anymore. Lawson turned his head. You sure? I am. He didn't move fast, only reached up and covered her hand with his. Then come on. That night, they lay side by side in the wide bed Lawson had built from pine, the room scented with beeswax and wood smoke. The wind moved gently through the chinks in the walls, but inside, it was warm. Willa closed her eyes with her head resting on his chest, listening to the rhythm of his breath. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she had to keep watch. Lawson whispered into her hair, when we stand before the preacher, I want you to wear whatever makes you feel strong. She smiled in the dark. I've already sewn a ribbon into the hem. From Ruth's old bonnet. For luck. He pressed a kiss to her temple. You don't need luck. You've already found your way home. And Willa, drifting toward sleep with his arms around her and the children safe beneath their roof, believed him. Fully. The road to town was rough from spring runoff, ruts deep and patched with wet clay, but the wagon held. Lawson guided the team with a steady hand as Willa sat beside him, the babies nestled in the rear under a canvas awning. The morning sun filtered through cottonwood branches, lighting the trail in dappled gold. Dressed in a pale blue calico she had sewn from traded yardage, Willa kept one hand on the bench rail, the other resting on the folded paper Lawson had written their names on. The wind tugged at her braid, and she let it. You ever thought of leaving Montana? She asked after a while. I did once, Lawson said, eyes on the trail. After the war, I thought of heading south. Maybe Texas. What stopped you? He shifted the reins slightly. I didn't trust myself to start over somewhere I didn't know the shape of the land. And now, I don't see reason to look anywhere else. She looked ahead, where the hills opened into a small valley and the steeple of the church rose against the sky. I never imagined bringing my children into a town where I'd be looked at without shame. They'll see what's real, Lawson said. We walk in with our heads high, and we leave as a family. The town was busy with Saturday trade. Wagons lined the main road and the smell of fresh bread drifted from the bakery's open window. Willa kept her eyes forward as they passed the mercantile, though she registered the pause in conversation from a pair of women near the door. Lawson didn't slow. He guided the team straight to the church and helped her down before untying the canvas flap to lift the babies into her arms. Inside, the air was cool and still. Reverend Coyle stood near the altar, straightening a hymnal. He was a slender man with gray in his beard and a quiet demeanor. He looked up, took in the family before him, and nodded once. Is it still possible? Willa asked, her voice firm. It is, the Reverend said. You've come honest and you've come willing. That's all the Lord requires. They stood before him with Jolie and James cradled between them. There were no flowers, no guests, no music. Only the sound of wind pressing against the windows and the creak of the wooden floor beneath their feet. Lawson held Willa's hand as if he meant to never let go. Reverend Coyle opened the book and spoke the words slowly, deliberately, asking only what needed asking. When it came time to speak, Lawson answered first. I promised to build a life with her, not just a roof. To raise these children with her and to give them the steadiness I never had. Willa looked at him, her voice clear. I vow to make this life true. To meet it with strength and to keep nothing from you, not grief, not joy. We're not starting from nothing. We're starting from survival. The Reverend nodded. Then by the grace above you were joined. Outside, no one clapped. No one cheered. But when Lawson helped Willa back into the wagon with their newborns, she had never felt more seen. They returned home by evening. The sun hung low over the trees and the field behind the cabin shimmered with young green. Willa stepped down first, holding Jolie close while James slept against Lawson's chest. I didn't think I'd ever be part of something that felt like it belonged to me, she said. You belong here, Lawson said. Every part of you. That night, they sat by the hearth with both children sleeping soundly. The warmth from the fire reached every corner of the cabin. Willa leaned against him, her fingers laced through his. Next year, she said softly, I want to plant potatoes up by the ridge. The soil's thick there. We'll need a root cellar, he said. I'll dig one before the first frost. She turned to look at him, her eyes steady. This is what I want. This life. Not because it's easy, but because it's ours. He kissed her then, slow and sure, the kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything but gave everything in return. She closed her eyes, pressing her forehead to his. I love you, Lawson Levi Tucker. He breathed the words against her cheek. And I love you, Willa Ruth Tucker. The fire crackled low. Outside, the wind rustled the trees gently and the mountains stood quiet and sure as if they too had settled into peace. Years passed, marked by the creak of the porch boards and the changing weight of young voices. The fence held through every season and the coop filled with soft clucks and brown eggs. The cradle was passed down to a second daughter, then a son, then tucked away in the loft with care. Lawson built the root cellar and the smokehouse. Willa planted the potatoes by the ridge, and each spring they sprouted stronger. They never missed a Sunday dinner, never let the fire go out overnight. And every night he kissed her like it was the first time, even when her hair turned silver and his hands stiffened with age. They grew old in that cabin. Not quietly, but fully. And in that place carved from hardship and healing, love didn't just survive. It flourished.